Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host, Mike. With me, as always, is Evan.
Hi, everyone. So, I've been going a little bit insane lately. I think that's perfectly valid to describe it that way. And my latest insanity is that I really want to play a narrative event where maybe we can try to bring out more of the elements of Cecil Gaston trying to roll a six to slay a dragon, or Frydaal the Chainmaker raiding the coast of the Empire. What happens next? And the arcane journals that have been coming out, people have been very quick to jump on. Oh, what are the new rules? What are my new magic items? That's great,
Mhm.
and a lot of them. Hey, you know what? The best part about Warhammer
Normal.
is that the rules themselves tell the story. If my unit of state troops have the stubborn rule or something, and then they don't fall back after they just got absolutely slaughtered by some impact hits or something, that's part of the story, and that's something that the rules encourage, right? And using
hmm
rules to tell a story is the best part about Warhammer. But what about the context? What are we doing in the world? The old world is not set in the Total War Warhammer or the Warhammer 8th edition timeline of 2500 circa
Nope.
whatever. It's set in the 2270s, which is just 25 years before the Great War Against Chaos in 2302. Um, I know this because I've been reading all this Arcane Journal lore and looking at the timelines, and there's a nice big gap here where there's a lot of story to be told. I think there's some really interesting stuff happening with the Arcane Journals where you might even see some retcons of some of the stuff that's happened in the past. Things like Cathay showing up. I remember when we just got that update to the map where they just put a kind of a junk type ship onto the map next to Marienburg, and people were like massively speculating. Does this mean Cathay showing up? Does this mean Cathay showing up? Hey, it did. Great. That's
Yep.
awesome. And Cathay's been making a big splash in the competitive scene as well. But what are they doing in the world? What's happening?
So
Right?
let's back up a bit. Let's
Yeah.
back up a bit first before we go too far in the
Oh
deep
yeah,
end. As
yeah.
Evan's saying, he's been really immersed in this for some weeks
A little
now. So
while, yeah.
effectively, a little while. And we're both very excited about it. In fact, a lot of people are excited about it. So again, our focus, right, is growing the community, and we love what we like to call. Yes, technically, we use the term RTT, Rogue Trader Tournament, and even though most people don't remember what that means, or GT Grand Tournament, because those are terms that people are familiar with and labels that the Games Workshop community, whatever tabletop, whether you're a 40K Air West player, those are terms that people are familiar with. Oh, I understand that's a 1 day event. I understand that's a larger 2 day event. But generally speaking, everything that we do is labeled as an event.
Yeah.
Because again, we are focused on the larger community, not just the top winners, but everybody shows up is going to get something. Everybody's going to have a great weekend. Everybody's going to have a great time. And we do more than just the competitive games themselves. Now, we have a really great foundation in our OWL community with our single, 1v1, 2,000 point standard match play guide way to play the game, which has been a blast building that up over the past, year and a half, where we're getting closer to 2 years at this point. Super excited with how well that's been going, and with more and more players joining. And we've also done some online tournaments too, which has been really exciting. Still following the same format, but that's been fun. Of course, we have our normal leagues, and recently we had our first escalation league, where people start at 500 points and build that up. And that's been more successful than anything else, getting new people in, encouraging hobby time, encouraging painting, and then telling the tales of the story. And right
Yeah.
now, we're just on the verge of our first doubles event, right? So this is
Yes.
something
Right.
very different. So we're starting to check more and more of these boxes that, hey, the old world is such a great game system. It is so much fun, and it's set in such a cool world. There's more than one way to play this game and have a great time. Absolutely. And this is where Evan's like, you know what, Mike, let's figure out how to run narrative events. This
Right.
is where this all started. We're not going to go through everything today. There's far too much to talk about in a single video. So this will probably be a mini series of videos where Evan starts taking us through his process and what he's been doing and what we've been learning and everything. So we'll see how far we get today. But that's really been our goal of like, okay, so my challenge to Evan is we need to create, let's look at the template for how to run a narrative event. Oh, wait, there's not a
Yeah. There is
template
no
for how to run
template.
a narrative event.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. The closest thing is we did see in some recent years some 40K Crusade rules and some other things, right? So there's definitely some inspiration there. But the only real group that runs a yearly narrative event is GW
Yeah.
itself, running
Yeah.
their 40K narrative event. And that's very much it. And they have people dress up in costumes. I don't think we're going to get to that point. But we could still do some really incredible things. And we do believe this is the best game system to run a narrative event for. And so that's what Evan's been figuring
Yeah. I've
out.
been very hyper
What
fixated
does
on
that
it for
look like?
sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
So step one, before we get to our 2 day event, let's first run, how do we run a super fun 1 day event? And so that's the
Right.
starting point. So Evan, walk us through, where did you start?
So, to be honest, I kind of just started from scratch because I had ideas in my mind of what I wanted it to look like, and then I waited until after I had vomited all of those ideas onto paper to then see whether other people do similar stuff. And I found some things are similar, some things are different, so that's good.
Mhm.
More recently, we ran a survey. We'll talk about that later. So basically, what I'm imagining, right, is that we have a story in a very particular part of the world that is based on the lore that has been given to us in the Arcane Journals. Now, the Arcane Journals have been interesting in the sense that they have been slowly giving us almost like a comic book release, where each new edition that comes out gives us a little bit more of what's going on in the world for
Yeah.
a specific character in a specific place. For example, Corhill recently came up this river here, and he's fighting beastmen in the forest of Chalons right there. And he's
Mhm.
trying to recover a high elf diplomat who was kidnapped. In the meantime, we've got the other characters. So the named characters that they've released rules for are also in the old world. They are doing a certain action. And guess what? They also give you a scenario to play. And they say, hey, if you happen to have a friend who also is willing to do this with you and has the right army, because guess what? You have to have high elf, and that person has to have
Really
beastmen.
specific.
Yes, and the narrative events or the narrative scenarios are also their 3,000 points, by the way.
Yeah.
And if you have a whole weekend to do this, then here's a mission for you to play. And that's great. I
Yeah.
really like that a lot. One idea I had for the narrative events was we'll just play all of the Arcane Journal scenarios. There's a little bit of
Yep.
problem with
That
that.
there's more than a few problems with that. So as Evan said, for those of you who don't know,
Yeah.
what do you mean they wrote that narrative? That's the first third of the Arcane Journal you all skip over. There's actually some really cool stuff in there. Um, so I'd encourage you to actually sit down and read it. There's some great stuff in there, and there's really cool. And they're not just regurgitating the world that was from fantasy back in the day. They are expanding the world. They are adding new characters. They are creating new events. They are retconning things, right? They're infusing Cathay. So we really are now, I don't know what that weird Back to the Future diagram is, but we are now off on the old world is its own universe and is expanding, which is really,
Right.
really exciting. And they're doing a great job actually fleshing things out in a small way, but they are adding to this narrative, which each one of these books that they release. And it's really exciting too, because as Evan was diving into, he's like, actually, there's a lot of connectivity that you could work off of here between maybe not the missions
Right.
themselves, the scenarios, but the story. There's some great story in there.
So each Arcane Journal starts with, hey, so if you know nothing whatsoever about this army you're playing, let me tell you for a few pages the context, the history. That's horrifying. Oh my god, that's disgusting. And so we've
Some
got
great
some
art
stuff
too.
there. We give you a section of a map where we show you where are your forces starting from. The Beastmen, for example, are literally everywhere. They even invaded Athel-Loren only about a century before the Old World started. But if you see the little horns of the Beastmen, very great that they're kind of a central focused enemy in this story because they are literally just all over the place. You don't have to,
Yep.
like with Warriors of Chaos, come up with a reason why they sailed across the ocean. No, the Beastmen are just a day-to-day threat for everybody, which is awesome. That's
They
one of the
are.
reasons why I love them a lot. And then there's a section of the book right here, which maybe people think is, still just lore about stuff that you've already read before. But this section is actually about what's going on right now in the
It's
old
new.
world for one of your special characters. In this case, it's
Mhm.
Kralmaw. So, for example, Goros doesn't feature in this story at all. He's just one extra guy you just get rules for. But Kralmaw in here is the Prophet of Ruin, and he's got a little baby infant Morgur who he's trying to raise up because Morgur basically gets reborn and gets killed by the Wood Elves every like 2 centuries or so. So
Yeah.
this is his
Bummer.
ninth iteration, I think, and
Hmm.
it leads up to a battle against the Empire. Right? Got some great pictures in here. Oh, this is a great section. Look, if you want to figure out how to make a really accurate banner that actually says something, you could figure out what
Hmm.
runes mean what. I would love to do that at some point. But we have a
Super cool.
story, and at the end of the story, right, we've got a map that gives you a context. Where is this happening in the world? Right? Who are the forces? So the Beastmen are coming up from Reichland Forest. They're raiding villages and things, and eventually on the Great North Road, they meet up with a force of the Middenheim and some riders from these burned up villages of Isten, Butel, and Rocha, right? They've kind of the villages have been destroyed. Everyone's gone insane, or they've just been murdered. And finally, they're getting an ambush, and you get this battle. where it is not a both players have an even deployment zone and you have three strategic locations in the center of the table to fight for. It's asymmetrical because a scenario in the real old world wouldn't necessarily be that a pitched battle where both armies are deploying all their forces in exactly a square box against each other and then running at each other. There's kind of maybe other things that could happen. And so
Yep.
this is great. This massively opens my mind to, can we do
So
this?
different.
Can we make this happen?
Yeah. Now there's some problems out of that right out of the gate, right? Because our minds, our competitive minds are wired towards, well, it needs to be fair,
Yeah.
right? It needs to be 50-50 chance. But from a narrative standpoint, that's not necessarily true. It depends what you're trying to accomplish, right? So if we're playing a game and if the only win condition is points, victory points, right? That's the only way to win. Well, then obviously you'd want a fairly even distribution of terrain, a fairly even distribution of armies, so forth and so on. So there's an equal chance of happening. But as soon as you start saying, hey, the victory condition is not just points. It might be accomplishing something relevant to this scenario itself. Maybe it is slay this one particular character. Maybe it is you have to claim this one point. Maybe you have to burn this thing down, right? There's so many cool, interesting ideas and thematic things and terrain we can make and provide to create a really interesting scenario. And suddenly now when it's not exact points to points, in terms of just winning, that just changes so much. And also what if you start now tying it into, well, it's not just my game, because we're crafting a narrative over the course of a day, right? In terms of, and now what happens in game one affects game two.
Yes,
Things
exactly.
really start to get interesting.
Well, and what's great about that is the latest Arcane Journal, which, by the way, there is no ebook of yet. I've had a
Not
friend
yet.
send me some pictures of. They actually do have a narrative linked set of battles where it's three of these, and the
Mm-hmm.
first one is Cathay has come to just in time to the rescue of an Empire force. So you deploy an Empire force out in the front, and then a Cathay force shows up from behind them. And in the meantime, Frydahl's Warriors of Chaos are attacking them in it. So it's actually like a 2 versus 1 scenario where you could play with potentially 3 players. And that's the first scenario that you have in this kind of linked series of battles. And in each one, it says, hey, if one player won the first round, then they get to have this bonus in round 2. And for
Mm-hmm.
example, and so it actually brings all this stuff up. So whenever we get that book and we can review it, we can show you guys. I think that Games Workshop and the writers of this game really want more people to engage with the game in this way, and they're trying to give you rules to do that. And basically, I'm trying to do maybe some of the rest of the work, which is, look, I don't know how often people are going to be able to find friends who are going to come over to their house on a weekend and spend all weekend doing something like this, or someone who
Oh,
has enough armies so that we could have a good story where a lot of people out there have one army or 0 armies, right? And they want to be able to have a story where, if your only other friend has one other army, how are we going to have 2 the same army playing against each other 5 times? How does that be any different, right?
exactly right. So those are the
Yeah.
first barriers we need to solve in terms of, okay, we know for people to get really excited about this, it has to be an event. You have to have a room full of people for at least a day, our 16, 18, 20, 24 people having a great day before we get to a 2-day event. And that means, okay, the more people, the more fun this will be. But now you can't control what armies they're going to have, right?
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you have to create scenarios in the narrative that will support anybody showing up with whatever they have. We don't want to create barriers, right? You want to encourage people to show up. As soon as you start saying, okay, we need to open it up, now you need to make your scenarios not necessarily army specific. We do have different terrain boards though for different locations that could tie into the scenarios, but we don't know, is it going to be Empire and Cathay on this board, is it going to be Beastmen and Wood Elves, and we just don't know. So
Right.
it's just, suddenly you have to start thinking of it in different ways. But one thing that has been consistent when we've been talking to people and everybody is about the narrative. What makes the narrative is the stringing of what happens in round 1 affects round 2, which it affects round 3. Now we have that day is not a whole bunch of micro stories. There's a big story to tell at the end of the event. What happened as the result of all these battles strung together?
Right. And there should be a story that kind of carries forward a little bit with your particular army as it moves from one area to the next. Maybe you have a character who had a horrible defeat in the first game, and then he's coming back with a vengeance because he now has a newfound hatred for that force in round 2 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also there should be a story overall of like, well, if we're focusing on a certain area of the world and there's a lot of players and they're all fighting each other, is there an overarching narrative? In the same way that if we were playing a World War II tabletop game, if we're playing a whole bunch of scenarios where all these different players are fighting and it's all about, the invasion of Sicily, at the end of the day, we should be able to say, well, did Sicily get, liberated, or is it still in the hands of the Axis? And so in the same way, we might focus on an area of the world like the Border Princes or the Badlands or something like that, and say these two different teams were fighting over each other, and just in general, one side had a crushing victory, or it was really close, or it's still a grind, or something like that. And maybe if we have that kind of a story going forward, people can actually become invested in the canon of the story or the canon of their own army and want to bring that forward to the next time we have a narrative event, even if it's in a different place of the world or something like that. And we can maybe even have, I can keep one of my ideas right now, Mike, is that people can actually have a note card they can fill out and just say, what happened? What are some interesting moments that occurred? Anything really exciting or surprising happened during a game? Write those on a note card. I'll take all the note cards, and for the next event, I will use some of that information to feed into the scenarios or feed into the story or tell us what's going to happen next, because those battles and those memories should be relevant, right? If we're in this canon of this world, then anything that happened should carry forward to what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and suddenly, if we can achieve this, which we're confident we can. We haven't solved it all yet, but
Yeah.
it starts turning into almost like that D&D group where, hey, you're still telling tales of what happened in your adventure with your buddies from 10 years ago, because it was just so memorable to you and left such an impression. But it was because it was your story. It was what happened to you, whether you won or whether you died horribly. It was still your story, and it's an exciting story to tell. And just like gamers already do with their tabletop games. Now, often a lot of our stories are, oh, I can't believe I rolled all ones, or I pulled off this miracle and I cut off the head of that dragon with these sixes. But now it's not just I killed that dragon, it's I slayed, Smogrog or whatever, the horrible beast of the forest, and I saved this battlefield. And that led into the next round with the team where we were defending off the Chaos Warriors. Now, suddenly it just paints a bigger picture and a grander tale, and it makes it more exciting.
Yeah, so just to give us a little bit more specifics, right? We've had 10 Arcane journals, because there's 9 supportive factions and Cathay, and then the second Cathay one's come out, so that's an 11th Arcane journal. I think something like 6 of them take place somewhere, like the battles or the scenarios take place somewhere here.
A lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the one that I'm kind of currently most hyper fixated on, is what is going on with Frydaal the Chainmaker, her invasion of the Westerlands. She's raided Hollum, she's erected a monolith, and actually now she's here to stay. She's brought forces with her. You know what I imagine also is there's probably a lot of other Chaos forces who've seen Frydaal's successes, and maybe they're jealous of her. Maybe they want to outcompete with her. So think about it this way, right? You don't necessarily have to be the best of friends, allied on all terms. In fact, even on the quote-unquote good guys side of this conflict, the High Elves and the Cathay already have a lot of narrative reasons to be in great competition with each other. They both want to be these naval, world-spanning powers that are almost in like a Cold War struggle to manipulate the Empire, manipulate Bretonnia, and try to be, kind of all their fingers are leaking into those forces. And they might even come to blows with each other, and maybe they're going to try to out one up each other. So one of the elements of the story could be, if we have Cathay players and High Elf players, which one of them does better in their games, and if one does better than the other, maybe they have more influence over the next story. Because I can see in that sense, even if they're on the same team, right? Which one of them is going to be the world hegemon? And at the moment, it seems up in the air, right? But just the specific narrative is that Frydaal has invaded the forces of Magritta VI, who is one of the 4 different claimants to the Empire at the moment. She's the Sea Empress of Marienburg. She sent a force north to fight Frydaal, and guess what? I mean, you're supposed to play the battle yourself, where here's kind of the home base of Frydaal the Chainmaker, and she has extra forces that have kind of been sailing behind the enemy, and they're going to get off on their wolf sheep, and long story short, they're ambushing, right? And then I think that this Empire force probably gets massacred. I'm generally just considering the canon of each of these scenarios be that if it's in the Warriors of Chaos book, they're probably the one who won that battle, right? And so the Empire is not stopping them on their own. And in the latest Arcane Journal, we've seen that the Jade Fleet of Cathay has shown up, landed in Marienburg, and said, don't worry, we'll take care of this for you. And whether that causes some Empire forces here to be like, wow, you're just invading us, maybe we don't like that. Or if it, for example, makes Magritta VI look very weak, and perhaps the Wolf Emperor Sigismund in Marienburg, or the Reichland Emperor Wilhelm, whether either of them are interested in perhaps trying to assert their authority over some of these lands and say, yeah, maybe you don't have what it takes or something like that, right? And so that's part of a story that we can tell together as players. For example, if you want to be, maybe Sigismund's forces, you could be a knightly order of the White Wolf. You could bring some White Wolf knights and a Grand Master and be like, hey, I'm here to save the empire, right? But actually, what's really going on is that Sigismund wants to assert his authority, right?
Yep. So,
So how does all
there's a
this
lot of
turn
ways to go
into
about doing it.
okay? So how does all this turn into an event where people actually play some games on the table, right? Well, here's my psychopathic idea. You got teams. You have a team of people who are, let's just say, either Cathay, High Elves, Empire, Dwarves, the people who would want to resist the Chaos forces. They don't necessarily need to be best friends with each other. They don't need to march on the same field of battle. In fact, I imagine that Sigismund would be more than happy to watch Magritta's forces go get massacred and then only join the battle after they've already been slaughtered, right? That's a good example. But in general, they're on the same side. And if their team overall does the better of the day, then perhaps Frydahl's forces have been pushed back to across the Sea of Claws to Norska, from whence they came, and that would be what would happen at the end of the day. Or if the Chaos forces, which could be Wars of Chaos, demons, beastmen in particular, right? Even the Skaven, maybe they're manipulating things from behind the scenes. If they win, then perhaps Marienburg has been burned and destroyed, and the Chaos forces have a massive foothold to invade the rest of the Empire in a follow-up story. And this is something we can tell is by having these two teams of players. Basically, what I'm imagining is that teams would pair up against each other, and every round we would just count up the scores of each team in total. And then you'd say, okay, well, at the moment, the good guy team has 37 points, and the bad guy team has 44 points. So one side has a leg up, and maybe that tells us a story that impacts round two.
Yeah. So if you simplify the structure into its starting points, right,
Right.
it's effectively there is two sides, and the reason why you want to have those two big teams of who's playing the games today is because it allows a bigger combined narrative for everybody who's involved, rather than a whole bunch of individual narratives. It's we're all fighting towards the same story arc together, right? So that's the big benefit there. Now, inherently, there's the divide of good guys versus bad guys, but good news, there's plenty of conflict everywhere in the old world. So there's if again, we don't know who's going to show up. It's not going to be an even number of good guys versus bad guys. A lot of armies are kind of neutral factions, or there's just got lots of mercenaries, right? Or they just have a beef with one particular. Again, there's plenty of reasons why, depending on whoever shows up or signs up for the event, cool. Generally, it's good versus bad in this scenario, but we can easily move one army to one side or the other as needed
Right.
to generally have the same number of players on the two teams going into the event.
So I realized that would be a problem. What if we have 10 players sign up for my Forces of Order team and 7 players sign up for Forces of Destruction? If we want to
Yeah.
just pair them up against each other on our, 12 different tables, well, what do the other 3 people do? Well, Mike, this is actually where I get really excited because I've come up with the idea that you can either, if you choose to, or if you're playing a specific armory, this is a suggestion that you could be a pirate and you have a pirate faction, and this means that you could be an attacker on one of the scenarios against someone who's doesn't have another opponent, and
Hmm.
very often it'll be ogres, are almost always kind of a neutral or kind of like a raiding force. They can either be mercenaries fighting for one side or the other, or they can just be out for
Sure.
themselves just to get meat for their stomachs. Hey, I
Hmm.
like eating. I like ogres.
Hmm.
Or in this particular scenario, between the chaos forces and kind of the forces of order, perhaps the undead are kind of left out of the story, and maybe they're somewhere else. But you know what? That doesn't mean they can't show up and they can't play because Mousillon is right there. The undead of Mousillon can, for example, try to take advantage that the Bretonnians are distracted by the orcs that are rampaging across their lands. Or the Tomb
Yeah.
Kings have actually, there's something that's going to happen in the lore in about 4 or 5 years after where we are right now, is that Cetra actually launches an invasion of Norska, and for like 10 years he's just rampaging around Norska trying to get some artifacts back. So there's stuff like that that's going on. And if you are a third party, you contribute your score from that round to whichever team that you're kind of playing against. So if you're playing against the Forces of Order, then and you win, then you can add some points to the Forces of Destruction, because in technicality you kind of hurt their opponent, right? Enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing.
Hmm.
But if you are the individual highest scoring player of the Pirates team, at the end of the day, you get to be crowned the Pirate King. I want to be Pirate
Always
King.
fun. Yeah. So again, there's still,
Yeah.
details to figure out here, but you can see some of the first pass
Yeah.
ideas we have going on here. We're still going to be doing, again, we'll walk through in a later video our community survey and then how that influenced some of the decisions we're making. And of course, after we run some of these events, we'll let everybody know how it goes. But you can see generally what we're trying to accomplish and some of the different hurdles. And we want to create a template that not we can just take from event to event, but a template that other communities out there might get
Exactly.
inspired from what we're doing and might want to make their own version or expand upon this, or right, everything that we do right at Old World Legends is on our website. It's free, you can download it, it's on our Discord, it's available for everybody out there who loves Old World and wants to do whatever you want with it, right, and such. So it is, there's some challenges there, and I think effectively what we're taking away is we have general themes and ideas for the day, and we kind of have this. We need to resolve it's not going to be even. The people who show up, and we need to resolve that it's not going to be even. And so there's a little for the TO. There's a little bit of additional prep work beside telling everybody to submit your army list in advance. There's a little more prep work where we have to really figure out the teams in advance. And of course, there's always the day of the event. Guess what? Life happens. Someone was sick.
Right.
That happens, or family event came up or such. So you still have to be able to just do an audible and just figure it out live the day of. And so this helps create a structure so that everybody showing up to the events understands, okay, this is the framework we'll adapt to as needed for once
Yeah,
we get
another
there.
good example is that occasionally we have people who want to show up and they can only stay for 2 of the 3 games or something like that, and
That
then we don't.
happens. Yep.
And that's why,
And that's fine.
so in a best coast pairings, we just score people based on whatever your score is. You just get ranked against whoever, regardless of the narrative potential, right? So in these scenarios I'm imagining, there might be a good reason for dwarves and orcs and goblins to pair up against each other in the first round because they're kind of on the opposite sides of the conflict. And you see an orcs and goblins player is currently defending a mountain pass, and the dwarves are like, you know what, I would love to go smash those dudes right now. And you kind of help make those pairings happen based on the narrative or the scenario context that people want to engage in. So they're almost like kind of choosing what situation they want to be in. And I think that's something that I find really interesting because all these
Hmm.
situations in these books are very specific armies meeting each other for a very specific reason. And anything short of trying to like auto generate it, which by the way, I did for a while try to work on like a narrative scenario generator where you would just type in, okay, I'm playing Army 1, I'm playing High Elves, the other person is playing Demons. Why are we fighting each other? And it would just spit out a reason, like using AI or something. And I didn't get very far on that project yet, but maybe I'll circle back to it. And I don't know whether you would
We'll
even be
see.
able to do that in an event anyway, right?
No, and the reality is we need to really refine this, like our other
Yeah,
event packets. We need to just start running these events and start learning
seeing
and
what
collecting
happens.
feedback and see what happens. And the next one will be better than the first one. All right. What are a few other ones we want to go through today? Evan, we definitely don't. There's so much to talk about, and we will do more videos about this. But let's go through a few more topics.
Well, I maybe just so that people can enjoy a little bit of my all this lore stuff that I fill in, which by the way is it's all based on the Arcane journals. I've read all of them so far, or at the very least skimmed them. And so just what is going on in the world? Well, one of the things that's happening is that Frydaal is invading the Empire. Her warband sailed across the Sea of Claws, and it's been basically the Empire is very divided at the moment. It's split into 4 fractured kingdoms. They're not necessarily at war with each other all the time, but they
Hmm.
are not aligned. And
Hmm.
essentially she has raided and destroyed so much that Cathay under Miao Ying and the Jade Fleet has sailed and landed in Marienburg to help out. So
Hmm.
what I've kind of got here is some lore primer for the different forces that are involved and which characters are involved, so that perhaps this might inspire you. And the whole reason why this is here, right, is to perhaps inspire a potential player out there to build an army list that might map onto one of these things. In fact, one of the things I would love to see is if we can get all of the special characters that have rules on the table during these events, and
Hmm.
hopefully only
Hmm.
one of each. So I would want one player to be bringing Frydaal, for example, and one player
Well,
to
we
bring Miao
definitely would
Ying.
restrict it to only one per side. So
Yeah,
again, there's a little more prep work for a narrative event that the TO has to work with the players to um, figure out what's going to show up for sure.
yeah, and one of the things that I'm super excited about is being like, hey, I've got a friend, Matt, for example, and I'm like, I know that you have a Goros model and you love bringing Goros. Do you want to show up this event? Because we don't have anyone playing a Beastman army with Goros Warhoop yet. It'd be great if you could show up and bring the Beastman, and he would probably say, yeah, man, I want to do that. I would love to do that. And that's the kind of thing I think would be really interesting and exciting to actually try to recruit people to your team. You could get a team captain if the team captain's playing Frydaal, all the better. That kind of makes sense, right? And if that captain could help recruit people to their own team and try to help make the teams a little more even, that would be great. And maybe if people have a team that they're kind of committed to, it helps make sure that more percentage of people show up on the day. We do have every once in a while, people who can't make it. That's always a thing, but it's just good.
It happens.
All right, so what else is happening in the stories? We got the Wolves of the Sea. I would love to see some Wolves of the Sea on the table. I don't know if we've seen a lot of Wolves of the Sea armies. You played it a few times, right, Mike?
We've had a few players. Oh yeah, Wolves of the Sea was fun. Yeah, I played it at a handful of events. Some of the players have played it. It's a fun list, absolutely.
The Divided Forces of the Empire. So if you're an Empire player, you've got like 4 options. You've got Sigismund in Osterland, and he's kind of like the Ulrich type dude. You've got the Grandmaster Harold Gummonson and the Knights Panther. He can show up because he hates chaos. The whole Knights Panther is all has hatred against chaos. So you know what? This would be a great time to bring the Knights Panther force, because you might have a higher than average chance of actually playing against some chaos and being able to use that rule that you otherwise in like a singles event have. Maybe you're playing Cathay half the day and you never get to use that rule, right? The Jade Fleet shows up. We have Miao Ying, so at least hopefully one person can bring Miao Ying and fight on the front lines with her. Kralmaw is in the same area, so the Wild Herd. In the lore, the Wild Herd is essentially Kralmaw's kind of own dudes, and they're going around in the Drakewald Forest pillaging remote Empire villages, and they have moved north. And you know what? If Chaos is having a foothold, I imagine it will draw all hosts of beastmen to him. In fact, that's kind of what's happening in the lore right now, is that he's grabbing this massive horde of beastmen. And if in later Arcane journals, if Morgur kind of grows up enough to be a playable character, would be interesting, because I know a lot of people really like Morgur. The elves, one thing that my hyper-fixated brain is obsessed with is the fact that there's actually a brand of wood elves in the Lorelorn Forest. If you look right here, up here, this is the Lorelorn Forest. And a lot of people don't know this, that the wood elves are in many places around the world, not just at the Lorelorn. And Lorelorn is another place where the wood elves exist. And they've basically on the front lines with Warriors of Chaos, and they would be able to lay ambushes and fight against them. So I've got, to bring up here, we've got Queen Marisith is the leader of the Lorelorn Elves right now, and Ishaya Vess is a Sea Guard garrison commander. She's kind of the special character in the High Elves, and I imagine that the Sea Guard would start attacking these Chaos forces as well. So kind of put that lore fiber in here. It'd be great to see people bring the Sea Guard garrison force with Ishaya Vess. This is the perfect event for that. In fact, probably the next video we'll do, Mike, is what does a narrative army list look like? I can give you some examples, and maybe people don't want to know what kind of things should they play. And lastly, we've got the devastation of the Couronne. So here's in the lands of Bretonnia, we've got the King Lewin the Orc Slayer, and he's basically fighting against the Orc Warboss Spinecracker, and he's laying waste to Couronne, which has in the lore. This isn't where your named characters of Bretonnia are, because they're busy fighting in the Border Princes, which is a potentially different campaign. But right now, Couronne is being attacked by the Orcs, and we've got someone could, for example, build a duke with some specific items or virtues and say this is Lewin Orcslayer, and I'm showing up to the event as playing Lewin's king, the king himself, and that would be great. I would love to see that. So this is just some examples of how I want to help inspire people to play a more thematic list for a specific geographic location, all baked into our lore and our narrative that they're giving us. Yep. And if anyone else out there is as insane as me, you're gonna love this. Otherwise, that's fine too. It's okay.
Well, we're hoping a lot of people are going to love it. So we're going to find out, right? This is a trial, right?
It's a trial run.
Is it that a whole bunch of other communities out there, not just Old World, but other, AOS, 40K, don't run as many of these because is it because players aren't interested, enough of them are interested in it, or because it's just, quite frankly, a lot of effort, or they just need stronger templates to help them, like, hey, here's a formula I could just follow so I could easily run it with my group if somebody just provided that. So we're going to give it a go. We're going to see how far we get. We're going to run a handful of these. We've already asked our community. There's a lot of interest in running these. We'll start with some one-day events. If we'll see what we learn, go from there into 2-day. Hopefully we could do a 2-day event next year. That is what we're building towards. And ultimately, we'd love to have a template on how to run really fun, exciting narrative events just along your, normal 2,000 point singles events or doubles events or other events throughout the year. And hopefully this becomes a staple of not just our community, but maybe it will inspire other communities as well.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for that. And just circling back one more time, you know, if people are really into this and they need something as a framework, you know, for a long time, a year and a half, we were just playing rules out of the rule book for you know, competitive
Hmm.
play, trying to play these missions where the only thing you were trying to do is just kill the other person's army. And that was less interesting than after the match play guide released, and it gave people a framework to say, okay, we've got some strategic locations, we've got, you know, table quarters, we've got baggage trains. Here's some things we can do to make the game more interesting on that competitive level. What I'm trying to
Hmm.
do right now is the same thing I did about, you know, a year ago, where I was trying to build a better competitive framework by having, you know, gleaming pennant mission scenarios, and you know,
Yep.
the match play guide kind of replaced it for right now. But
There's a
until
lot of
Games
overlap.
Workshop,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's some overlap. Until Games Workshop releases a match play guide of narrative events, right? I'm jumping in. I'm jumping in 2 feet deep, and hopefully other people can take this and use it, and that would be awesome.
Cool. All right. Any last closing words, sir?
I think that this is more than ever a great time for people to stay legendary, right?
All right, and we will catch you all next time. And again, we will continue this series and give you more updates once we. I think maybe the next time we'll have our survey complete and analysis of that, and also hopefully our first pass at our one-day event rules packet, and we can cover that next.
Sounds good.
All right, see you then. Bye.